If you don't know who I am, Aaron said I'm Travis Barth. I grew up in this church. My parents are Kevin and Bonnie, sitting right over there. Yeah, and it's such a pleasure to be here this morning and an honor to get to come speak and share about what I'm doing. I'm here to tell you this morning, as Aaron said, about this really cool and awesome opportunity that I have to go to New Zealand and work with a college ministry called Campus Outreach. And normally, if I'm not mistaken, on this Sunday, people are sharing a ministry update of what they've been doing. And I haven't went yet, so I get to talk about whatever I want. No, but what I will be telling you about what I'm going to be doing, and really a kind of a journey and story about how I got to this point. So, how it works. How did I get here? How did I get to this point? Aaron kind of started telling you a little bit, but what really I think there are a few things that really took me from this terrified high schooler that was scared to even move to Minneapolis to go to college, to a man that wants to move across the world and share the joy of the gospel of Christ with other people. So looking back, there are really a few things that I find particularly notable about this journey that shaped me into who I am today. The first was in my senior year of high school, where I think this really all started. There was a group of people that went to, it's called the Cross Conference. There's some of them here today, Chad and Sherry, Aaron, my brother Cody. And they went to this conference, and it's a missions conference that's really talking about just like what God's heart is for the world and the need for workers in all places of the world. But I didn't go to this conference. How did it impact me? What was important? What they did was when they came back, not only did they talk a lot about it, about this conference, where they kind of heard these mind-blowing things of what God's doing around the world, but they did, in the senior high room, we watched once a week the main sessions from this conference that I got invited to go to. I actually found out Cody wasn't too excited that I got invited to go to his Bible study. But I'm so glad he didn't put up a fuss. And that I got to go because it really started this change in my heart, orienting me toward what God's doing around the world. Another thing that I think was super impactful was I read this book called Radical by David Platt about this same time. And in this book, he points out really just what an injustice it is that the church is not living radically for the sake of all people knowing the grace of God. Sorry, I'm going to take a drink of water. And because I'm kind of a math and numbers guy, I studied physics and math in college, and so I'm really a numbers guy, and they really stick out to me, and that's really what I remember about this book. So some of these statistics really just opened my eyes and my mind to really this injustice that we, as really a Western church, just have our focus on some of the wrong things. Like, for example, America spends more money on Halloween costumes for their dogs every year than they give to world missions. Halloween costumes for dogs, not for ourselves, just for our dogs. Or he tells the story in this book of this magazine. I don't really remember it clearly, so I probably got the details wrong. But this church built this beautiful, massive church that cost like $1 billion or something, really big. And right under that article was this praise to the same body of believers for giving like $5,000 to some missions agency. And he points at this because what? Why are we spending billions of dollars on this church, but only $5,000 to the purpose of the church is glorifying God's name, and that's all we're spending to do that among the nations is $5,000. But the number that really stuck to me the most is that there are 3.2 billion people in the world that have no access to the gospel. And that just grieved my heart in a way that I never could walk away from. And I don't think David Platt wrote this book for us to feel guilty or shame for the ways in which we live our lives in America, but for us to orient ourselves and notice that our priorities are off. We are way too focused on ourselves and not in God's name being known among the nations. And I think truly, if we believe that the gospel is good news, we should put our money, our resources, and our time where our mouth is. As simple as that. So Cross Conference and reading this book, Radical, really began this like beautiful story that I was seeing. And I'm sure I heard about it so many times at church. Every Harvest Fest, we had a missionary come and speak. Like, it was very present in my life, but it wasn't until this moment that it really sunk deep into my skull that missions is something that normal people do. Like, this is something that people do, people can do, and should do. It's important. And it's not this like grand call that someone gets called into, but merely a faithful step to, help God's name be known among the world. And it was at this time that I really could see these biblical truths in my Bible. God began to like kind of flood my view with this like golden thread that he's weaving throughout his Bible of missions, that his heart is truly for the world. And it starts right away in Genesis. One of the first verses that I think impacted me greatly was Genesis 12, 1-3. God is making his promise and covenant with Abraham. And he says this, "Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So this is the beginning of a story that God's weaving from the beginning of Genesis all the way through the whole Bible of repairing the fall and bringing all people back to himself, back and bringing his glory back on the earth. And he uses this one man, Abraham, to do this. He blesses him in abundance so that he will be a blessing to the rest of the world. And there's so many fulfillments to this promise that God makes to Abraham throughout the Bible, abundance. But the two most notable is that Jesus comes from the lineage of Abraham. That's why at the beginning of Matthew, you have this big long lineage that nobody reads through and just skips over because it's boring. But what he's doing is he's showing that Abraham all the way to Jesus, and David's in that lineage as well, is God is blessing the world by giving us Jesus to save us from our sins. But then the ultimate fulfillment of this promise we get to see in Revelation 7. In this verse, I have this on my wall. One of my friends gave me a framed version of this because John gets a vision of the fulfillment of this promise that God made to Abraham. And John writes, "After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white, palm branches in hand, and crying with a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb.'" This is the end result of such a grand story that God is showing throughout the Bible, that every nation, tribe, and tongue will be represented at the throne of Christ, bowed in worship to the Lord who saved them from their sins, everyone, all peoples, tribes, and tongues, from their eternal suffering. Another verse that had a pretty big impact on me was Psalm 46:10, which I'm sure most people have this on the wall in their house. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." But this is only the first half of this verse. We cut out the second half when we put it on our walls. And the full verse says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I'll be exalted in the earth." And I think that's just incredible that God tells us to be still, to have peace, not to stress. Because, why? Because he will be exalted among the nations and in the earth. That's why. That's just so grand that our ultimate hope is in Christ's exaltation among all people, and that will happen. Whether we do something about it or not, that's going to happen. I could go on with this list for hours. It's just like the whole Bible is this thread of missions of God's heart for the world, of wanting to save all people. But while these things, getting to join Aaron's small group and watch some of the cross-conference sessions and reading some books like Radical and Missionary Biographies and getting to see this in my Bible is a great jumpstart for catching this vision for world missions and God's heart for the world. It's difficult to maintain a consistent and high vision for what God is doing in the world. It is easy, I think, it's pretty easy to get energized by a good speaker or a really good book and get excited and pumped and want to do it, but keeping that consistent is really hard. I had it explained to me one time that I think this is just true in general of any vision, But a vision for the world and for what God is doing in it is kind of like a bucket with a hole in it that we like get excited and kind of fill this bucket and it starts to leak, like naturally. Like it might be small and insignificant and we might not notice it right away, but it's present. It might be slow, but it's leaking. And I think this is so true. If we are not consistently filling our bucket of world vision with what God is doing in the world, what our part in it looks like, it's going to empty. And that's kind of what was happening to me. As I moved off to college, stepped away from a consistent small group, and people that were also excited about this, I just kind of had this vision leak. It's just kind of happened. But really, that continued to leak. I don't think I ever got to a point where I was like, ooh, missions. But I just lost that goal. And it wasn't really until I got involved with this ministry called Campus Outreach that I'd never heard of that I began to come back. Which, might I say, you guys have a total Campus Outreach takeover at church this Sunday, so lucky you guys. Although I'm actually super pumped to hear Nathan speak later, so get excited for that. Anyway, I got introduced to Campus Outreach my sophomore year of college when I got invited to a simple spring break trip to Myrtle Beach, or as we lovingly call it, Dirty Myrtle. It's really dirty. And it was super dirt cheap, which is why I went. It was cheaper for me to go on this trip, literally, than go home. And I got to be at the beach, transportation, food, all the things. It was great. But what I didn't know is I was going to fall in love with the ministry that they had and what they're all about. And through this ministry, over the next 2.5, 3 years, I have grown to love Jesus so much more and in my faith in ways that I never would have imagined. I'm excited to tell you why. Had the biggest impact of anything in my life was being intentionally and deliberately discipled by older, wiser men. That simple. I was encouraged, pressed, and held accountable to walk faithfully as a Christian on the campus and in the real world. And I was pointed so often, needed to be pointed back to the refreshing grace of God and the gospel. It was through being discipled that I was pushed to actually live out my faith and to live as a faithful Christian on the campus and live missionally rather than just looking at this thing that God is saying is going to happen, that his name is going to be known, and actually taking it and making it a part of my life. Most notably, I'll talk a little bit more later about what discipleship actually looked like, but most notably, what they pushed me into were, and by pushed I mean kind of forced. The first thing that they pushed me into was a prayer group. Excuse me. My junior year of college, I was kind of fed this idea of, because I was excited about what God was doing in the world. And there's a verse in, I didn't write it down, now I'm going to read it. Matthew 9:35 through whatever, the end of the chapter, where God is talking about the disciples are walking with Jesus through some village. I don't know where they're at. And there's all these people that the disciples are like, what are we supposed to do with all these poor, helpless, harassed people in the streets and in this town? And Jesus, rather than telling them to go do something about it and help them, he tells them to pray for them, to raise up, the harvest is plentiful. Pray to raise up laborers to be sent out into the harvest. Which I think is just crazy and not what I would do. I'd be like, oh, we should do something practically to help these people. But God's like, no, you should pray. And you should pray to send up laborers that other people are going to make an impact in this. And so that's what we did. Every week we would meet at 7:15 on a Friday morning, which is a really big ask for college students to wake up at 7:15. But that's what we did. We'd wake up and pray as a group. This is what I would make these prayer sheets like this for individual nations that are mainly unreached by the gospel, that don't have access to hear the good news of Jesus. And we would pray that God would raise up laborers, and we would pray for specific issues in the country for 30 minutes. And we'd go on our day. Simple as that. And I had no idea how much this weekly meeting of praying for nations was going to make an impact on my heart and orient me to spending a life impacting the nations. Little did I know that I was going to be an answer to my own prayer of sending laborers into the harvest. The second influential thing that I was pressed into, which I've gotten to talk to you guys about this before, and you guys were a big part of helping me be able to do it, was getting to attend what we call a cross-cultural project, but a mission trip to South Africa. And on this ministry opportunity, I could talk about it forever because it was amazing. I got to spend 4 weeks building relationships and sharing the gospel with people on a college campus in another culture that wasn't my own. And it was on this trip that I realized, I think I just for the first time understood more clearly that this is work that people do, and I can do it and I love it. This is so simple and easy, and you can make an impact just by being a normal person in another place and getting to know people and sharing the good news of Jesus. It's so simple and beautiful and easy, and I don't just have to read about it in books and hear about it in sermons, I get to partake in it. So that was how that impacted me, and abundance of other ways. But finally, the most major impact on getting me into the mission field is I got pressed to become an RA in a freshman dorm last year, and God abundantly blessed me by giving me a floor of guys that were ready and excited to grow in their relationship with Jesus, as simple as that. And I had the amazing opportunity of walking along these guys last year and living side by side with them. I was on a freshman floor with them, which is pretty close quarters. And at the end of the year, I got to see the fruits of my labor of these guys that grew immensely in their maturity and in their faith. And that was just such a joy. And I don't think I could ever walk away from that and not want that to be part of my life, to not have an impact on other people and to disciple younger Christians in the faith. I also don't know if I would have stepped into any of these three things if it wasn't for older, wiser men discipling me, pushing me, pressing me, and more importantly, equipping me and supporting me through these things so that I could walk faithfully through them. And they taught me skills of how to share my faith with others and how to ask good questions of other people to get to know somebody so we can address core issues of the heart and point back to the gospel. So these are some of the things that have really led me to this point in my life of taking a step into what God has overseas. And there's so many other things I can mention. I could look through this congregation and point to so many people that have had such a major impact on my life. I just looking through has been such an encouragement, and I truly cannot imagine. I just don't believe. I can't speak for God, but I don't believe that I would truly be at this point in my life. I don't think I would want to be a faithful disciple of Christ if it wasn't for this church body throughout my life. Simple as that. Anyway, that's a little bit how I got to this point in my life. But what you guys actually want to hear about is what I'm doing. What am I going to do next? So I want to tell you a little bit about what I'm going to be doing, why I'm doing it, who I'm going with, and about New Zealand as well. So to begin, who is Campus Outreach? Who is this organization? I'm going to be brief on this because honestly, I don't think it's that interesting. If you have questions, ask me afterwards. I love the organization and would love to tell you all about it. But essentially, Campus Outreach is a ministry that, this is their vision statement, they exist to glorify God by building laborers on the campus, college campus, for the lost world. In every area that Campus Outreach exists, all of these blue and red dots, the red dots, they don't exist yet. They work with local churches to pursue college students for the sake of them knowing and having a deeper relationship with Christ. And they do this through a method of evangelism, helping people understand the gospel, establishing them as a mature and faithful disciple of Christ, and then equipping them to do that work with others, to share their faith with their friends and with other people, and then finally exporting them out into the lost world. The whole goal is it's for the lost world, for God's glory to be known on the lost world. But Campus Outreach not only exists in the States, Minneapolis is, I did something. Anyway, it exists. I'm just going to stop that. I had a fun laser pointer and I wanted to use it. Minneapolis is that far dot. Peoria is probably the next south one where Nathan McLean is at. But anyway, it exists in the States, but also all over the world. So all the blue dots are where Campus Outreach currently is. And then the red dots are where a local church in that area has reached out to Campus Outreach and wants them to send workers to begin the ministry there. And so hopefully soon, all those red dots will be blue. Which I think is really exciting. So I will be joining this blue dot all the way down here. like one of the closest places you can get to Antarctica. And let me tell you, as I was understanding this fact that God's glory is going to be spread to the ends of the earth, and that it's us that's supposed to take it there, I did not know I was literally going to be going to the ends of the earth. I don't think you could get more definition, end of the earth, than New Zealand. But I will be moving to Dunedin, that's how you pronounce it. It's Gaelic. It looks nothing like what you would expect Dunedin to be pronounced like. To join a team of missionaries, this is my team that I'll be joining. There's a couple people missing. But I'll be joining this team with Campus RH hopefully in January. And we'll be working together at the University of Otago, which you can see in the background. That's like the main academic building. It's very beautiful. But I want to tell you a little bit more about New Zealand and why I'm going. And to do that, I've been talking a lot, which I'm probably going to keep talking. But I want to do a little trivia, because that's fun. Yeah, so to start off with just a couple fun ones, just basing. How many sheep are there in New Zealand? I'm not going to make you yell it out, because Cody, yell it out. What do you think? B. 1.3 million. There are 25.3 million sheep in New Zealand, which is a 5-to-1 ratio with people. There are 5 sheep to every 1 person in New Zealand, which is just crazy. There's also 4 million cows. So for all you farmers, there's a lot of animals. Another fun one. How many people travel to New Zealand every year? It's like, everybody knows this. It's beautiful, right? It's a lot of people travel there. C, you're right. 5.1 million people travel to New Zealand every year. Actually, that's not true. The statistic, in 2024, they're expecting 5.1 million, which I'm assuming is average. Okay, now a more real one. What percentage of New Zealand is evangelical Christian? 17% is evangelical Christian, which may seem like a fairly large number, but since 2001, that has declined from 38%. And this is 2018 numbers, is 17. And it is continually rapidly declining. The non-religious population, the atheist population, has risen from 2001, it was 29%, to now being 50%. And like I said, these numbers are 5 years old. They are drastically, the staff in Dunedin have told me there's about a 5% Christian population in Dunedin. And that's even more so in college students. They've just stripped away any of these religious ideals. But to drive this point a little bit home, how many churches are there in Dunedin, New Zealand? To give you context, Dunedin is about 120,000 people, and Thief River surrounding area has 35 churches. There are 19 in Dunedin. Which I just again, maybe it's because I'm a numbers guy, this is just that's crazy to me. That this country that was 20 years ago had almost 50% Christians has none, 0. That's just crazy to me. Another one. How many international college students are in New Zealand every year? Let's see, there are 38,000. Which might seem like a small number, but there's only 180,000 college students in New Zealand every year. That's 20% of the students are from international locations. In America, we have 5%, and we have a lot of international students. So this is even bigger because there's more access to those international areas in New Zealand. But many of them come from places like India, China, Southeast Asia, a lot of areas where there is even less access to the gospel. And so it just adds to part of strategy of doing ministry in New Zealand. So what will I be doing? What am I doing in New Zealand? Why are you going there? I think this is a really good question. And a lot of people ask it because it's important. And I think the only word that can describe what I'll be doing is discipleship. All out, bar none, it's discipleship. But before I talk about that practically looks like, I want to define what does discipleship actually mean? Because we throw around this word a lot, discipleship in the church, and it somehow becomes both meaningless and overcomplicated at the same time. And so I'd like to just take a step back, and I've already used this word multiple times. So define what it means, and why is it important? Why must we do discipleship? So what is discipleship? I think the most clear, succinct, satisfactory explanation that I've ever heard on discipleship is from Mark Deaver in his book Discipleship. It's a 9 Marks book. It's this big. glorious, so small. I highly recommend it. But he says that discipleship is deliberately doing spiritual good to someone so that he or she will be more like Christ. And we want people to be more like Christ because people that are like Christ are just so much better to be around, right? Like, don't we want people to be like Christ? And we also, more importantly, want people to understand the gospel of grace so that they can live in the freedom of the gospel. That we who once were sinners have already found freedom in this gospel and we have been saved. We should want to share that with other people. We want to hack out heaven. And discipleship is the method that God gives us for that. So I love this explanation of discipleship because it's just so simple and clear, and it doesn't have any of the fluff and anything that I'm probably going to be adding as I talk more about it. But discipleship is purely helping someone follow Christ more faithfully, to be more like Christ. And that's exactly what I will be doing in New Zealand. I'll be doing everything in my power for the sake of helping other people follow Jesus more fully and clearly and faithfully. And this directly parallels what Paul says in 1 Corinthians, and he says it elsewhere too. He says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And that's exactly it. We as more mature Christians should be pulling up people who are less mature or non-Christians so that they become more like Christ. I'll never forget Dan Moose. He was standing right here, and he did this. Does anybody remember this? And he was I actually have no idea who he is or what he does, or even what he was talking about that Sunday, but he was doing this. And he was talking about this posture that we have to assume as Christians, that we should have one hand out, one hand forward, holding on to somebody that's more mature than us, being pulled forward in our faith by somebody that is discipling us. And we also should have one hand backward, pulling other people with us in this journey and discipling them. This is the posture. I'll never forget this. It was so simple. And again, I have no idea what he's talking about. But this posture, I just loved it. It was so simple and clear. And the scriptures are so clear of this, that this is what we need to do. And this is the posture we must assume. So why does it matter? Why do we care about discipleship? First, it's commanded to us in the Bible, abundantly commanded to us that we are to be discipled and to disciple. Just to name a few, the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19 through 20. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them all that I have commanded you. That's Jesus' last command before he goes up into heaven, is this, that we should make disciples of all nations. So we probably should do it. I already mentioned, Paul says in 1 Corinthians, imitate me as I imitate Christ. He also says that to the Philippian church and Thessalonica. Timothy says in 2 Timothy 2, and what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who are able to teach others also. You're able to directly see that lineage of Paul is teaching Timothy, who's teaching another faithful man who teaches somebody else. That's generational discipleship. Older women are to train younger women, Titus 2:4. Fathers are to teach their children, Ephesians 6:4. And the list just keeps going. You could just keep going. So it's very clear that we, as believers who are under the lordship of Christ, are called to the work of discipleship. We're called to raise up younger believers. And it's not for the few, not for a couple that have been called or set apart for this work. It's for everybody. We are all called into this work. Secondly, a discipleship is just why should we care? I should go back to that. A discipleship's a major blessing. That's why we should care. It is such a joy and honor to get to be a part of this work. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but I have, that why would God use humans on earth? Why would he use us? I'm sorry, but we are pretty pathetic as a human race, just in general. We are just not good for much in comparison to God's infinitude. Why would he use us when he could just do it himself and do it so much better than we can? But we're commanded to disciple people anyway. We're commanded to raise up new believers. Why would he do that? And I think it's two things. It's because it's such a blessing and a fulfilling joy that we get to partake in this. It's good for us. And it's so much more glorifying to God that he would use us as feeble, meek, crappy vessels. Let's be honest. And it really reminds me of what 2 Corinthians 4 says. It says, "For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay." We're the jars of clay. "To show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We, as weak and broken vessels, can only make an impact on God's people because he is gracious and he's faithful to work through us and shine through us as broken jars of clay." Isn't that so joyful and amazing that God would use us? I just think that's such a blessing and joy that we get to partake in. And like I was kind of just explaining with the 2 Timothy example, we get to look back. Timothy gets to look down, not Timothy, Paul gets to look down and see Timothy, who's discipling others. And that's just such a joy to get to see that. So this is why discipleship matters, but what does it actually look like to disciple and be discipled? I have 5 points. The first thing that I would note, and I think is a big part of discipleship, is that it is personally and individually attentive to a person. I don't have my book. I'm going to read a short story from a book. This book's called Down to Earth Discipling. I highly recommend it. It's also very short. It looks bigger, but half of it's appendix. It's 130 pages, and it's a super easy read. And it's super practical, which I desperately need in books. So Scott, the author, is meeting with this guy, Robert, and this is what he says. "I'd known Robert through mutual friends, and we connected frequently over several months. He was recently back from Germany, where he had served his military term and was looking for a job. He wondered whether I had a job to offer him. Scott says, 'No, but let's get together and go over your resume,' I said, sounding more confident than I actually was. We met at a sandwich shop one noon and went over his resume. That didn't take long, but we enjoyed getting better acquainted. Realizing I might not see him again because he might move soon, I asked him if I could tell him something that had made a big difference in my life, my spiritual journey. And I said I wanted to hear about his spiritual history too. 'Okay,' he said cautiously. So I turned over the greasy placemat, took out my pen, and traced my spiritual journey using the bridge illustration, which if you don't know what that is, I'd love to show you. Wendy taught us in Sunday school. She knows it. I'm sure Nathan knows it. If you don't know it, you should see it. It's really cool. He took out his pen, wrote out the bridge illustration, and I didn't preach, is what he says. And the response was silence. I felt a little awkward, like Edward Kimball, who he talks earlier about in the book, wanting to make a dash for it. 'Robert, what's your spiritual background?' I heard a voice saying, not certain that it was mine. Robert smiled and said, 'Not much. My dad never stayed around, but when he was home, this Jehovah Witness guy kept stopping by. I read a little of his stuff, and that's about it.' Silence. 'Could I take that diagram home?' Robert said, pointing to the placemat. 'Sure.' My next risk was suggesting that we meet to read about the life of Jesus. He cautiously agreed, and we began getting together at his tiny duplex at 7 a.m. every second Tuesday. I'd bring 3 Burger King breakfast croissants, one for Robert, one for me, and one for his teenage son, who grabbed it on his way out the door for school. At each of our meetings, Robert and I read one chapter of John's Gospel and discussed it. No notes, no handouts, no sermonettes, no opening or closing prayers, no easy answers, just me, Robert, and the Bible, and the Holy Spirit. I took my time. Robert turned out to be highly opinionated about Jehovah's Witnesses, the military, and women, just to name 3. I listened and tried to bring him back to John's text. Jesus was a mystery. I didn't pin him down to receive Christ lest he make a premature decision. After 8 months, Robert said he wasn't good enough to receive Christ. Got to make some changes first. True. Robert had some bad habits: smoking, drinking, cursing, and chasing women for starters. But I had not railed against these during our breakfast studies. I kept the focus on Christ. He said, "Scott, in the morning, I get up and look under my car to see if I hit someone while driving home drunk the night before. And I tried to explain to him that Christ changes a person over time and that no one has the willpower to change without God's help anyway. But Robert persisted. Not good enough. Even Romans 5:8, yet while we were sinners, did not help. To my surprise, a few weeks later, Robert asked if I thought a person could do business with God on their smoke break. I raised up in my chair. I took a smoke break at work last night, knew I needed to surrender, and tears came. I could not stop crying, and I asked if Jesus would come in. Tears came to my eyes too, but that was just the beginning. Robert and I continued to read John together. And he keeps going. But first, for the people that immediately check out when someone opens a book on stage, I'm the same. Let me give you a quick synopsis of what just happened. Scott, the author, has his friend Robert, who he met for coffee to discuss career opportunities. Scott invites Robert to study the Gospel of John with him, and Scott consistently shows up every other Tuesday to read out of John for 8 months. That's about it. The Holy Spirit continued to work on Robert's heart and eventually brings him to the foot of the cross. Like, that's just so simple. There was no hullabaloo or jazz to it. It was just, let's get together and read from the Gospel of John, and let me give you personal attention. And that's the story of how Robert's life was changed, was through this simple act. Scott merely opens up his time and his Bible to this man and gives him personal attention. And they read through John, and I'm sure, I guarantee Scott was not able to answer all of Robert's questions. I'm sure every time he was driving to his house on that Tuesday morning, he was terrified and was thinking why am I doing this? It's been 8 months. He probably doesn't want me to be here. He's probably annoyed at my presence. But now Scott gets to look back and walk with Robert, continuing to hold him as he moves forward, as Robert is following and working toward a relationship with Christ. That is just crazy. And this is all because Robert decided to give him individual personal attention. Because it says earlier in the book, it talks like Robert had attended programs and things like that before, but the individual personal attention of Scott is what made the difference. So, second thing that discipleship is, it is intentionally gospel-centered. As Christians, really the gospel should be the center of our whole lives, right? So it should also be the center of our discipleship. And I think that this means, yes, that discipleship should focus on the Bible, like in that story, but also means that the discipler should help the disciple understand more of what the gospel means for their life. An example of what I mean by this, a guy that I have had the ability to get to know very well and lead in some Bible studies, we'll call him Bob for his sake. Bob grew up in a church background that, whether they meant to or not, they taught him that he had to work his way into heaven, that he was qualified by his works to get into heaven. That, as simple as that. And because of this, we spent a lot of time studying scriptures and talking through that our salvation is through our faith in Christ alone, not a matter of works. I got to encourage him and show him many times that we are saved merely by Christ's blood on the cross and nothing else. I also got to empathize with him because I also have a similar bent in my heart. I feel this relentless need to be good enough, improve myself, and earn the gospel. But truly it means we're not saved by grace if we have to work for it. If we have to do something, that's not grace. We're earning it, and we cannot earn our salvation. It's contradictory to the phrase of saved by grace. We can do nothing and achieve nothing to get into heaven. So what that looked like was, as I was discipling Bob, I almost said his name. As I was discipling Bob, I was intentionally gospel-centered with him and helping him understand that just more of what the gospel is and what it means for his life and the ways in which he needs to grow in his understanding of the gospel. Next, what does discipleship look like? It is so fun. It's super fun. You've probably heard this illustration before, but building a relationship with someone, you need both bricks and mortar. If it's all bricks, it's just going to topple over. If it's all mortar, you're not going to get any height. And especially on a college campus, people are engaged by fun, and relationships are started through having fun and being a normal person. So I told you last year I was a freshman RA, and I think my biggest win as a freshman RA was when I turned our floor into a slip and slide. It was amazing. It was toward the beginning of the year, and my entire floor of guys was at a all dorm event that they were required to be at. So nobody was on the floor, and I was hard at work laying tarp on the floor. Here's a photo of what it looked like. I don't have any videos because it's just a bunch of shirtless guys. And I felt like that was weird to show at church. But this is what it looked like. I just covered the whole floor in this tarp. And so when the guys got back, they were shocked by a slip and slide. They're like, "You did this? The RA turned the floor into a slip and slide?" It was amazing. And this might seem silly and maybe a little just dumb, but I truly think that this simple thing of laying a tarp and throwing some soapy water on it, like made such an impact on my floor and in my relationship with these guys. By us like letting loose, having fun, and doing something stupid, that just deepened the relationship so much more. And they were able to open up to me, who I was like, as the RA, was able to like have fun and like show them that I'm not this like authoritarian figure in their lives. And they just became more of themselves because we were doing silly, fun, good things. Next, discipleship is really messy. And it's invasive to your life. Last year, I was living with the guys on my floor that I had the opportunity to disciple. And that meant a lot of long, hard, often late night conversations. When I took the position, I said that I was going to open my life up to these guys and be a resource for them. And I had to put my money where my mouth is. When stuff happened and they needed someone to talk about it with, I got to be there. And that meant a massive death to self and to comfort. Inviting other people into my life is kind of, as a Scandinavian and a northern Minnesotan, it's scary and hard I love privacy and I love my comfort. And to open that up to other people is really messy, scary, and hard. But I also think it's one of the greatest joys and honors of discipleship that other people would open their lives to you, and they want you in it and that's just such a great honor and joy that people invite you into their weakest moments to listen, and you get to point them back to the gospel. Like, what a joy. Finally, discipleship is multiplying. So by discipling others, I talked about this a little bit, you get to reap the benefits and the joys of getting to watch other people live faithfully and fruitfully. I heard someone speak last year on the topic of discipleship. It was actually a Camp Sarge staff member. And they started, they had a slideshow and they just started showing photos. And it was like, we're all like, who are these people? Like, what are you doing? And by the 10th or 12th photo, we're like, I know that person. And oh, that person, then the staff member, and then one of my friends, and then another friend. I'm like, what's going on? And it was this big list, of 15 people, I think, that really from this one person discipled this person, discipled this person, discipled this person. Kind of to use Dan Moose's analogy, it's like barrel of monkeys. You just keep pulling them out and they're holding on to one another. And I think just what an incredible joy and cool opportunity to be the first person on that list, which that list kept going. That's just where they stopped. But to look down, it's like grandchildren. You get to see the fruits of your labor in all of these other people that are now walking faithfully with the Lord. Such a true, great joy of discipleship. And that's just the nature of it, is to multiply and to grow. So, oopsies. A couple encouragements for the church. I have two. Get messy. Invite somebody else into your life. Join this work of discipleship. Don't volunteer for another program. Some people might be mad at me for saying that, but don't volunteer for another program. Invite somebody into your life. Begin with one person. Somebody that you see needs help and spiritual encouragement, and ask them if you could disciple them. Be vulnerable and ask that. While we need our ministry events, they are so impactful and have been super impactful in my life, we need so much more people that are living sacrificially and giving individual attention to people so that we can get to the hearts of matter and truly enact change. I'm sure most of you also with the thought of that are like me, and that is terrifying. Who am I? Who am I to do spiritual good to another person to help point them toward Christ? But 2 Corinthians 4 says, God works through the broken jars of clay. Through feeble, meager hands, he makes major impact. Just look at the people of the Bible, for goodness sake. They are not it. They're not great. And God just does amazing things through them. So get messy, get discipled. And secondly, be discipled. We never, I don't care how old you are in this room, you do not graduate from the work of discipleship. We always need the encouragement of wiser Christians in our lives pulling us forward. Just because I'm 22 doesn't mean that I need discipleship and you don't. I promise you that. Find someone who you want to be more like, who just shows you a bigger picture of who Christ is, and ask them to disciple you. I promise you, you can afford that vulnerability. Because even if they say no, what an honor to have someone ask you, like, I want to be more like you. I see so much of Christ in you, and I want to be like that. You can afford it, I promise. Also, there's just such immense wisdom in having good counsel, even in worldly circles. Like, there are so many programs in colleges and workplaces to like have a mentor in your work career. Like, the world has figured this out. It's very, like, if you've ever read through Proverbs, I swear that's what half of the Proverbs are about, is having good counsel. One that like particularly stuck out to me says that where there's no guidance, a people falls, not fails. But in an abundance of counselors, there's safety. And I just think that's so true. Having older, more mature people, they don't have to be older, more mature Christians, guiding us in the faith is just like, it makes it so much easier. So my encouragement, assume this posture, follow Dan Moose, and I promise you won't regret it. It is such a joy and a blessing. Okay, I'm stepping out my soapbox now. So, what will ministry look like in New Zealand? Like, I said I'm going to be doing the work of discipleship, but like, what does that practically look like in New Zealand? So, especially when I first get there, it will be a lot of building relationships and trying to get to meet people so that I can disciple them in the faith. Which that means a lot of meals in the dining center, sitting down with random people, or going to ministry events and getting to introduce myself to people and just trying to build relationships. And like, on a college campus, that's a lot of food and a lot of fun. Like, that's pretty much what it is. One thing that the Kiwi staff, New Zealand people call themselves Kiwis, if you didn't know that, the Kiwi staff have made just incredibly clear is that doing ministry is really slow. And they've used like lovely analogies, like doing ministry here is like tilling cement, which just sounds great. But this is due to a lot of factors. I think the biggest is that New Zealand Kiwi people are just really generally untrusting. Another analogy they used is that Americans are kind of like a peach. You can kind of like get through to the inside and you're going to hit a pit. But we have pretty soft outside, even though it might not feel like that. Like, we talk to strangers on the streets, like things like that. That's not normal in New Zealand. New Zealand, they're like a coconut, pretty hard and abrasive on the outside. It's hard to get through. But once you do, it's like they're all open and they're like, they trust you with everything. And so that means that doing ministry can be really slow, trying to break through that outer part and get into the center. And they say on average, it takes 2 years for a person who is interested in the gospel. It takes 2 years for them to become a Christian and profess faith. Another reason for this, of the slow ministry, is just a lack of groundwork. Because the nation is just so unchurched and unreligious, no one has a groundwork for Christianity. It might not feel like it, but America is still very much so a Christian nation in comparison to so much of the world. Like, we talk about the basics of Christianity, even in our media when it doesn't feel like it. And like most people, like the average person has been to church, or at least to a wedding or a funeral in a church, and have heard of like Jesus and who God is, and that's just not the case in a lot of the world. So there's just a lot of groundwork to build in helping somebody understand what Christ did for them. It just takes a lot of foundation. And so that's what I will be doing. I'll be doing anything that I can to help others know our gracious Creator and what Jesus did for them on the cross so that they can be a faithful and mature disciple of Christ. And God willing, I will be on a plane to New Zealand in January to start this work. But I cannot do that without this church body, without the immense and incredible support of you guys, praying for me and supporting me as I go, and have helped push me to this point and gotten me to this point. So I would love if the church would be praying for a few things, a couple of prayer requests. First, when I arrive in New Zealand, I'm pretty much going to directly get in a car and drive across the country, which is like 4 hours because it's not very big, the ministry has like their biggest event for the year, if you want to say that, called Summer Lake Project. We have these in the States too, but it looks a little different there. It's basically like a 10-day long conference that talks on the like foundations of having a faithful walk with Christ and what that looks like. So please pray for the staff there as they're recruiting for this event, and students that they're hoping to get to come would be ready and excited to go. And that the staff are able to recruit well. Secondly, Pray for me. I still have funding to raise to go. I have to be able to afford to live in New Zealand to be there. And so I'm still raising monthly support. So please be praying that God would provide that support so that I can get plane tickets and a visa to go and then live there for 2 years. And if you'd be interested in joining my support team, I'd love to talk to you. And then finally, please pray for me as I go in these last 2 months before I leave, that I'm well prepared to really hit the ground sprinting with their Summer Lake project. And then immediately following that is the beginning of the school year, which for college ministry is a sprint. And so pray for me that I'm well rested and ready to go. And just ready and leaving America well too, leaving family and friends. Yeah, so that's what I'll be doing. And if you'd be praying for that, would be amazing. If you'd like to follow what I'm doing in New Zealand as I'm there, I will send out monthly ministry updates through, I have a QR code which you can sign up there through email. So you either can scan this QR code, or I have a paper version up here, and there's one at the Connect counter. I didn't ask if I could put it there, I just put it there. So there's that at the Connect counter. I'd love to have you on my updates so that you can be praying for me. And yeah, that's all I've got for you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to come and speak and just being such an encouragement as a church. Would you like